I'm Bonnie Thornton-Dill, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. And each year, our Collegiate Council organizes a forum in order to spark dialogue around matters of interest to the college, as well as the broader community. This year's topic, Confronting Our Past, the University of Maryland's 1856 project, will explore the University of Maryland's founding and its relationship to slavery. In this period of racial and historical reckoning today, I'm particularly pleased that the Council has chosen to focus on these issues here at home on our campus, and to help us think about the relationship between our present day experiences and the concerns, our present day experiences and concerns, and the context in which they are rooted. We have three presenters joining us today. First is Dr. Herbert Brewer, a Morgan State University Assistant Professor of History and Geography and a UMD alum. I actually have been around long enough to remember when Dr. Brewer was a graduate student and with the guidance and collaboration of Professor Ira Berlin was leading a group of student researchers in an effort to uncover the history of slavery in the founding of the University of Maryland. I was not close to that project, but there was a lot of excitement about it, and I did read with interest the booklet they produced. So I'm very pleased to see that Professor Brewer has continued to expand and build upon that work. Today, he will provide important background about the history of enslavement in Maryland. And later, we will hear from Lae'l Hughes-Watkins, our university archivist, and Joni Floyd, our library's curator for Maryland and historical collections. Hughes-Watkins and Floyd are the campus leads for the 1856 project, an initiative furthering our commitment to provide a comprehensive narrative of the Universities of Maryland's history. This project marked the start of the university joining something called Universities Studying Slavery Consortium, an international group of colleges and universities encouraging their campuses to think about their connections to slavery and the slave trade while addressing historical and contemporary issues surrounding race and inequality in higher education. So today we will be accepting questions for our guests through the Q&A function on your screen. And our Collegiate Council Chair, Caroline Wilkins, will pose many of these questions to our speakers during the question and answer period later on, and she will let you know when we will move to that. So I am now really pleased and excited to pass the microphone, so to speak, to let him unmic, Dr. Brewer, to unmic himself, or to open his voice and to start off. So Dr. Brewer, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton, and good afternoon to everybody. So I'm going to tell a story about this experience. For me, it was a very gratifying and rewarding experience, and I think all of those who were involved in it would agree. In 2006, the University of Maryland at College Park celebrated its 150th anniversary. And as part of that anniversary, of course, it detailed and summarized its history. And there was very little said in the official statements about the role of slavery in the foundation and origins of the school. And this particular oversight caused some consternation within the university community, and people raised their voices asking the questions, really, is something being hidden, and why wasn't it more prominent? Trying to understand that history and that past. And so the president of College Park at that time, Dr. C.D. Moat, had the idea that perhaps the university would respond in an appropriate way, and he approached Dr. Ira Berlin. At that point, I was a graduate student, a PhD student of Dr. Berlin's, or rather working under his supervision. And so he approached me, and we came together and thought about what we could do. And we came up with the idea of designing an undergraduate course, a 1 year or 2 semester, in other words, consecutive undergraduate course, where we would gather a group of undergraduate students who would then study this past, this origin, and present a report at the end of the process. And so we sat down to design this course and thought about how we would select the students. We had a very open. We spent some time because Dr. Moat had provided the resources to advertise what we were doing, and we invited students to apply for the course, and it was competitive actually. And we picked 18 students at the end. They came from all around the university. They were not only, in fact, it was open to all students. It was not only students who were arts and humanities majors. It was students from every sort of ethnic background as well, gender, et cetera. It was really well represented. We thought a very good representation, cross-representation of the students. And the students were excited. We were excited. And we had a very rewarding 2 semesters. And the way we designed the course was that the students would combine first of all, reading, some deep reading in the first semester, and then follow that up with some archival work and with a series of site visits. And so they visited George Washington's Mount Vernon plantation, for example, to get an idea of what a 18th century, a 19th century plantation looked like in the Chesapeake. They visited the American History Museum at that time. The African American Museum had not been opened, but the American History Museum, and we had for a whole day the attention and support of Ms. Faith Ruffins. I remember that as well, helping us. We went to a Black Baptist church in Fairfax, Virginia, which had been opened back in the 19th century to get a sense of the communities, Black communities, and the sorts of institutions that they would have created at that moment, and the students imbibed some of that history as well. The students divided themselves into committees, a writing committee, various research committees, and went into archives. The Prince George's County Historical Society, the Maryland State Archives, for example, and of course our own archives at the University of Maryland. One of the, and so those students gathered those things, as I said, that first semester where they're reading broadly, they're reading and the secondary literature, they're reading to understand the extent to which Prince George's County itself sat within a larger Chesapeake region, which sat within a larger Atlantic world, understanding the global connections that shaped the specificity of Prince George's County, where the University of Maryland would eventually be written. And so after that broad opening, they narrowed it down and started to look specifically again at not just Prince George's County, but the Bladensburg district, which is where the university would have been situated. And again, more specifically at the Calvert family. And that very first set of documents, et cetera, that they looked at were census tracts, a very good place to start. Understanding the nature and pervasiveness of enslavement in the area, understanding the percentages. They were able to also, for example, come across runaway ads as a way to again get a sense of how life itself was operated within the region. So in that design and in terms of the content of the course, our students we're developing a sense of where they would go with this information that they were gaining, acquiring. Now, for most people, of course, they want the smoking gun, what we call the smoking gun. They were very determined, right, to find specifically every bit of information that could sort of show exactly and precisely, how slavery was connected to the University of Maryland. And unfortunately, alas, the students did not find a smoking gun that said, these enslaved persons worked here, on these days for these many hours and those sorts of things. They could find no such documents that directly put specific individuals, at the spot where that university campus exists today. And why was that the case? That was the case because there had been a fire, which were frequent occurrences, in the 19th century. And unfortunately, it did massive damage, destroyed much of that documentary information that might have contained the sort of smoking gun that the students were looking for. But it turned out that the lack of a smoking gun also provided really a teaching moment and an opportunity for students to understand how history itself is done. That historians don't simply look or only look or exclusively look for a document here or a document there. As important as that documentary evidence is, it is never sufficient. You've got, of course, primary, secondary sources and lots of other stories, but context becomes the most important thing. And so students, without guidance and support, began to get deeper into the context of Prince George's County, the life of Prince George's County, and they built some quite good types of evidence in terms of their census tracts, in terms of understanding, what the percentages were, in terms of understanding, that literally no one could live in Prince George's County and not come across slavery, that it touched every aspect of people's lives. And as they dug further, it became more evident that, for example, when the Maryland Agricultural College was formed, when it was founded, the board of directors, looking at the board of directors, they could cross-check and figure that, yes, most of the people on that board were enslavers, for example. So as Dr. Berlin had famously sort of said, if they didn't build the actual buildings, they brought the bricks that built the buildings, and maybe if they didn't bring the bricks that brought the buildings, they made the bricks, which somebody carried there, and on through. At every level, enslaved people touched the lives of the work in Prince George's County. So I kind of also, as I'm describing the process of them building this richer and deeper history of slavery in Prince George's County and how central slavery was to it, there's a role that many people played in uncovering this and in helping the students to find their way. One of the students' most important discoveries, if you might call that, was meeting the descendants of people who were enslaved by the Calvert family here. And that filled in a lot of information for them. The individual who stood out the most is an individual, Adam Francis Plummer, who was enslaved by Charles Benedict Calvert's father, and then given to Charles Benedict Calvert, University of Maryland's founder, given to Charles Benedict Calvert as a 18-year-old. His 18th birthday was given this man, Adam Plummer. And Adam Plummer, for all intents and purposes, if I could say so, never left the side, meaning he was always there, of Charles Benedict Calvert until Calvert died, in 1864. So Adam Francis Plummer then becomes an important part of the story of the founding of the University of Maryland, that he was there, and he was always there. His life itself is an interesting life. That is Adam Francis Plummer. Students learn, for example, that he met his future wife, Emily Saunders, who had been enslaved on another plantation some 7 miles away, called the Seven Sisters Plantation, which is where, if any of you are familiar with Prince George's County, which is where Flowers High School is today. And part of in terms of the family folklore, which was relayed to them, Adam Francis Plummer walked on weekends, that was the understanding, from basically Prince George's Plaza to Flowers High School, and had to be back, by Sunday night. Over 20 years, they had 6 children. And of course, they became important figures after emancipation in Prince George's County as well. Their son, Henry Vincent Plummer, was the first Black chaplain, Army chaplain, United States Army chaplain, for example. So all of these sorts of connections are part of that history of the founding of the school. One of the things that is important for us to understand, of course, is amongst the various considerations that existed, that presented them, the various things that presented themselves, is that there was debate about the nature of slavery. Slavery is in its twilight. We must understand that by the 1850s in Maryland, in the Chesapeake, and that tobacco, for example, had declined in economic significance, though tobacco planters still exerted a considerable amount of political influence, but their economic star had diminished, had dimmed. And there were individuals like Charles Benedict Calvert who looked at alternatives in a way of speaking, could see the writing on the wall of this system in decline. But he's an important figure, if we can recall. He's an important figure in keeping Maryland in the Union when the Civil War came, as a supporter of Lincoln and that sort of thing. Even though Lincoln, if we recall this as well, Lincoln got, I think, 2 or 3% of the vote in 1860. Right, most people were voting for the sort of pro-slavery candidates, but people like Calvert were powerful enough to keep Maryland in the Union, and Calvert was also an important figure nationally to convince and influence Lincoln to create his compromises, which allowed slavery, for example, to continue. When Lincoln, may I remind you, wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, Maryland was sort of like carved out as an exception, and slavery continued in Maryland. The Emancipation Proclamation did not apply, for example, to Maryland. So again, the University of Maryland, if you look at the folks who are involved there, it's very much caught up in these great developments that are taken nationally. One other person who the students discovered, who I must bring up as a founder, one of the founders, is a man by the name of Benjamin Hollowell, who was the first president of the Maryland Agricultural College, or the predecessor. And Hollowell, of all ironies, was a Quaker. And Hollowell resigned the job after 2 months. Now, they did some searching. Some students went up to the Quaker archives at Swarthmore in Philadelphia, trying to find, exactly why did Hollowell's papers, they got them, but could not find why Hollowell resigned. So the sort of speculation would be that perhaps his Quaker beliefs might have made him realize that, no, this is not tenable. He might have fallen out with his board. Remember, at this moment as well, Maryland itself is a kind of complex place. Places like Montgomery County and parts of northern and western Maryland had moved considerably away from slavery, whereas the Eastern Shore and southern Maryland, the pro-slavery forces were tied much more. So, College Park's foundation is caught up again in that great paradox and that great contradiction. And so the students haven't spent their time, right, and energies and in analyzing these things, put their report together and presented the report. They presented these people who they had found, things they had found out that they did not know about. I think most of us had not known about before they started the project, including the Plummer family, including Benjamin Hollowell, their Quaker first president, and other aspects of Mr. Calvert's life. And they presented these, including and with recommendations. One of the recommendations that they suggested was the naming of 0106, room 0106, I believe it is, in Francis Scott Key Hall, after Adam Francis Plummer. I don't know, I've not been on the campus for a while. I don't know what became of that particular recommendation of theirs. And they made other recommendations about signage and things of that nature. So what has become of this? It's great to sort of see that the university has joined the Universities Studying Slavery Consortium, and hopefully this is the beginning of something important. Maybe I can speak to that a bit later as I sort of wrap up. But for now, I think I'll turn the floor over to Lae'l Hughes-Watkins.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer. So in this in this photo that we've chosen to kind of center the 1856 project is an image of the Dory family. The family in this image is the kitchen of the University of Maryland around 1912, when it was still the Maryland Agricultural College. And this space was nicknamed the Charles Dory's Health Resort. Pictured from left to right, you see Bill Dory, who is seated, a gentleman named Ferdinand Hughes, Spencer Dory, and Charlie Dory. And these men are Lakelanders, were Lakelanders, which is a historically Black community. And it's important that we utilize this photo to remind ourselves as members of the 1856 Project that we are centering the stories of Black life as we do this investigation. And that it's important for us to focus on uncovering Black labor that is a part of the university's history, but is still not widely understood or known, specifically in the genesis and the beginning of our institution. Dr. Brewer, as you already can tell, eloquently covered a lot of the early years and beginning of our institution as a Maryland Agricultural College. And he mentioned how our institution is steeped in the slave economy. And we have so many actually of our university presidents that were tied to the Confederacy and were a part of the Planter Society. You already heard about Charles B. Calvert, who became our second president after Mr. Hollowell left. And just even more specifically, Charles B. Calvert's father, we actually have the slave schedule from this family, where it shows 120 slaves were that they had enslaved 120 individuals, and previously 50 were owned by the wife of George Calvert, his family named the Steers. But Charles Benedict Calvert inherited those slaves and plantation upon his father's death in 1838. And actually 2 of those slaves were his siblings. But again, it is not just the Calvert family. I mean, in 1867, we had Charles C. Minor, who was a captain in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and he was our president 1867 to 1868. We have Franklin Buchanan, who was the president from 1868 to 1869, who's a native of Baltimore, and also served as superintendent of the U.S. Naval Academy and the highest ranking officer in the Confederate Navy. And I could go on, but we do have a strong history tied to the Confederacy. We have a strong history tied to the slave economy. And this project will be important in helping us understand how that history has impacted the trajectory of our institution. So as Dr. Brewer said, we are part of Universities Studying Slavery. It is an international consortium of colleges and universities, 80 plus members. Institutions share best practices that they address both historical and contemporary issues related to race and inequality in higher education and in university communities, the complicated legacies of slavery in modern American society. Most USS members focus on their own campus, and organized by the University of Virginia since 2014. Member schools are all committed to research, acknowledgement, and atonement regarding institutional ties to the slave trade, to enslavement on campus or abroad, and to enduring racism in school history and practice.
Dr. Brewer mentioned connections, and so we want to talk a bit about why we're doing the 1856 project, and just wanted to mention our frame is an Africanism of call and response. And we want to acknowledge that it was Dr. Brewer who came to the university, and his lecture was What Made College Park Possible, where he shared a lot of this rich history. Although I'll say, Dr. Brewer, I was still taking notes as you were talking, because there's so much to learn and to learn from you. At the conclusion of his lecture, he did charge the audience Lae'l and I and many members of the advisory committee, which we'll talk about later, were in that audience. And so we have responded to your call by joining Universities Studying Slavery. And another response is that we've been poring over the document that you've been talking about, the Knowing Our History courses and the end product, the Knowing Our History booklet.
So we do see this also as a project of reparative archives. And for those who may not be completely familiar with that terminology, the act of repair, if something is broken, that needs restoration. When we think about our institutional memory, this story is not widely embedded, even though we do need to acknowledge the amazing work with Terrapin Strong and the new onboarding program that has been established by the institution. But historically, the story of the university's ties to slavery still needs to be grounded further within our institutional records and within our institutional story. And so our approach with respect to our work in the reparative archive is to bring more documentation, is to draw those stories together and to make those connections within our records, and to do further investigation with additional repositories and the communities that we will be working with surrounding the University of Maryland. And again, in respect to my colleague, Joni, mentioning the idea of call and response with the 1619 project, and yes, that project set the world on fire when it was brought to the fore. And despite whatever varying opinions people may have, we do hope that the work that we do will also set a fire and ignite conversation and change and make us revisit in our framework for how we view our institution and what we believe that we know is the story of our institution. And Terrapin Strong, oops, sorry. Just real quick, just adding to what I said earlier about Terrapin Strong, we do believe this project hits at the goals of Terrapin Strong with engaging diversity and issues around social justice and EDI. And so we wanted to make sure our work tied into the goals of our institution as well. And so here we have a basic timeline for how we began this work. Again, building off of what was done with Dr. Brewer and Dr. Berlin. 2006, you have grad students, as Dr. Brewer already went over, with Professor Berlin, with the assistance of President Moat, established a Department of History course to investigate the university's ties to slavery. 2009, you have the publication of Knowing Our History, African-American Slavery and the University of Maryland. Then in 2018, African-American History at UM Walking Tour, developed by Kim Nickerson, Assistant Dean in BSOS. And then in 2020, February 4th, what made College Park possible, referring back to the wonderful talk by Dr. Brewer at that time. And then March 10th, we have Dr. Georgina Dodge, Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, helping us to answer the call to join USSS.
Thank you, Lae'l. Around, March 25th, Lae'l and I agreed to serve as co-chairs, and our first official meeting was not quite a week later. At that time, we were called Universities Studying Slavery at the University of Maryland, our planning committee, and the 1619 project that Lae'l talked about was a conversation that we obviously took to heart and became the 1856 project. For most of our time, we have been organizing ourselves into committees and writing our bylaws, but we've also been meeting with members of the consortium. We've actually had meetings with the founders, the UVA folks, and we also had meetings with the representatives from Georgetown, who, at least in this region, has probably a very, most people have a understanding of the initiatives or have seen reports about their reparative outcomes. Oops, I won't talk about 2021 because we have another slide for that, but our focus has been on what we're going to show in the next few slides.
So here is our advisory board. It was important for us to make sure that we had partners across campus to the best of our ability. We have Dr. George Kentiva from African American Studies. We have Dr. Barnett Pablo Zuckerman, professor and chair for anthropology. Dr. Mark Leone, distinguished university professor, who's also under anthropology. We have Dr. Nickerson from BSOS within the history department, Dr. Bonner and Dr. Richard Bell. And earlier we had Dr. Sorgel. Honors College, we have Dr. Tracy Dula, associate director, and then in the libraries, myself, my wonderful colleague and co-conspirator, and then the head of our special, Joni, and then the head of our special collections and university archives, Doug McElrath. And as we mentioned earlier, we have Dr. Dodge from diversity and inclusion. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had representation from the community, a community member. So we have Maxine Gross, who is the president of Lakeland Community Heritage Project. And Maxine has been providing such important feedback on how we really do bring in the voices of our surrounding communities and making sure that they have that seat at the table and helping us see the project beyond just our scholarly walls at the University of Maryland.
And if I can just add, Lae'l, speaking of representation and seeing beyond perhaps our mindsets, we did have a student representative, but she did graduate. And for those students out there who are interested in being on the advisory committee, we do have a seat at the table for you. Let me move on. So our mission is threefold. We've been kind of talking about this, but just in blue, black, and white, I should say. Our mission is to investigate, analyze, and disseminate. We are going to do research, and by we, it's not just the advisory board or our standing committees, but we hope to bring in more volunteers in the form of student researchers. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but we is more than the advisory committee. And our goal is to really integrate our findings into the collective understanding of the University of Maryland history. We translate our mission broadly into 3 objectives. So I talked a bit about developing scholarship and pedagogy centered on the Black experience. And again, that scholarship will be by all of us, student representatives. We're going to have community scholars, and then also faculty and staff will participate. That scholarship will find a home on the digital infrastructure that we're going to build. That's where you'll find our reports, our event calendar, our surveys, other calls for participation, and also links to other forms of how we're going to package our research. Our third objective is going to take a little bit longer and has many legs. But when we talk about memorializing the enslaved and Black experience, we're talking about a physical memorial space in twofold in terms of a space of reflection on campus, but then also a place that would house our findings. Also a place for one of our calls is for a university historian. And I'm sorry, that is the living memorial portion of our memorialization. So those are sort of roughly our 3 objectives that we have then translated into priorities. And here are our top 10. And we'll talk a bit more about the other priorities when we talk about the standing committees.
And really, we see this work as ongoing. We don't see how this can have an end date. And when you really think about the gravity of the work that is upon us, it can almost seem overwhelming at times. So that's why we really felt it was important for us to highlight what our top priorities in the early stages of our work. We know that we need a program coordinator, which we actually have underway. Thinking about the importance of having an 1856 project inaugural launch event, the importance of heavy archival research, building community partnerships through oral histories and workshops and listening events, initiating an 1856 project speaker series, as Joni mentioned, digital infrastructure, so website, digital collections, and digital exhibits, bringing on graduate assistants, building out UMD course development, community research fellowships, and an archaeological survey. So this is what Joni was waiting. It was like, we didn't want to say anything initially. But in 2021, we did receive support from the president's office. And so we did create a proposal. We met with President Pines, and thankful that Dr. Dodge created that bridge for us to have that conversation with President Pines, to begin to let him know what we were envisioning, what were some of our goals for the 1856 project. And he tasked us with creating a proposal, highlighting what our vision and objectives were. And he did give us $900,000 over 3 years to support some of our initial priorities. And so we were very appreciative of this initial support from President Pines, and it is already being utilized to support some of our top priorities.
We're going to talk about research investigation in a moment. Lae'l is the chair or co-chair of that, and I am the chair of the Outreach and Engagement Committee. But for those out there who are interested in volunteering, we do have some other standing committees, communication with the focus with the website that we talked about, but then also forming our research into reports, also a social media presence. The scholarly and cross-discipline, we've had some initial and very promising talks with faculty, 2 of whom are in our Hughes, so very excited about moving forward with that. But as Lae'l said, this is going to be ongoing work, and so we welcome other opportunities to collaborate. The memorialization is a committee. I talked a bit about the broad objectives for that. We do recognize that that's going to take, that's going to be built upon the research that we uncover and the additional fundraising that we plan to do, hence Committee 6 with grants. And they're talking about responding to a call. We had to put in an image of Frederick Douglass.
So I am also on the research, and as Joni said, on the research investigation committee, which is actually also co-chaired with the head of special collections that I referenced earlier, Doug McElrath. And we have broken down some of the areas of research that we want to engage in during our first leg of this project. So we are looking at these top 3 areas: the enslaved in context, thinking about the time period 1810 to 1864, and then the Maryland Agricultural College looking at 1856 to 1919, and then the African-American communities and the MAC and UMD looking at 1860 to 1960. Something that we're really excited that we're going to have the opportunity to engage in this year is participating in the Summer Research in a Summer Research Institute, which is in collaboration with BSOS's SRI program, and also in working with enslaved.org. So we had 2 faculty leads for that project, for that initiative, Dr. Zuckerman from anthropology, and then Dr. Quincy Mills from history. And then our archival research leads, myself, and the head of special collections. And then the students who will be participating in the SRI will have the opportunity to engage in investigation of land records, and also will be tasked with generating biographical narratives of the enslavers, and hopefully potentially names that we hope to uncover of potentially enslaved during our summer program.
The Outreach and Engagement Committee, we are focusing, as you can imagine right now, with information gathering from the other members of the consortium. We are conducting online research. We have about grown from 80 to now 90 members. And so we are trying to look at the histories of USS at those institutions, and we are sort of dividing up that work. We are also, we are tasking members, and we hope we get some more, with becoming institutional experts. We're going to focus on Maryland and work to liaison with the other 7 members of USS that are at Maryland, including Dr. Brewer, Morgan State University. We are conducting listening sessions, and there's a list of sessions that we've conducted and that we plan to do before, up until June. The sessions are similar to this, but go into a lot more detail about ways to participate. And during those sessions, we have, we share our priorities, and there's an opportunity to participate in a poll during the sessions, and then we talk about the outcomes, and then there's a follow-up survey. In addition, the O&E committee is working on the first kickoff event that we mentioned as a priority, and we selected November 1st, which is of course Maryland Emancipation Day. As Dr. Brewer talked about, the Emancipation Proclamation only freed those enslaved in the states that were in rebellion. And so Maryland, while still part of the Union, was still a slave state. So it took the Constitution of 1864 to emancipate those enslaved in Maryland. So those are just some of the activities we have going on. Again, this is a university-wide initiative, and we are very cognizant and interested in working with faculty, staff, students, alumni, but also our neighbors surrounding the university.
And Joni, I just want to add here that, this amazing work that, as far as the outreach and engagement that Joni's been helping lead, it came out of our conversations that we actually had with other members in USS, and the importance of during these listening sessions, because they were doing, many of the members were doing listening sessions early on, because it was really important to hear from the various stakeholders, from those on campus to those off campus, about what their vision was for this work as well. And so we're really being very intentional with doing these listening sessions to make sure as many voices can be heard as we move forward in this project.
And so this is our last slide. There is our contact information. You can also reach out to us directly.
Thank you.
So we will both say thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand the spotlight back to Dr. Brewer.
Thank you there, Joni. And I think that was a great summation there, and the work of the Maryland 1856 project. I think it's a brilliant strategy. I would only, I guess, underline the importance of reaching out to the local communities, which of course you are doing, and I really think that that's vital. The University of Maryland College Park plays a vital role in the region, of course nationally and internationally, but in the region, and it has these historic ties. And I think this is also an opportunity to further, to deepen, to strengthen those ties that the university has with its surrounding communities. So, you know, all I can say at this point, it looks like you're on the right path, and I'll pledge, you know, my support in any way that I can, little way that I can, and I think I hope you all success in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, and we have you on recording, so we will be contacting you.
Thank you. And thank you to our panelists for speaking. And thank you for everyone who's here listening with us. We can open up for questions now. If you have questions, please post them, submit them through the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of your screen. And then we will let our panelists address them. I'll give you a few minutes to collect your thoughts, because this was, you know, a really rich presentation from all of our panelists. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but I have questions. So maybe while people are warming up, I'll just oh, here's one from the audience. Are there any plans to expand this kind of research to include people who were indentured servants?
Joni, I didn't know if you wanted to.
You're the chair of research investigation, so why don't you start?
I don't feel like we can box ourselves in at this point, because so little is really known about the relationship still between the university and enslaved labor. So I think we have to follow where the path takes us on this next leg of our journey. So I don't feel like it's appropriate for us to say we will not cover indentured servants. So I definitely think it's fair to say that's on the table based on where our findings take us. But thank you for the question.
And I'll just add that during the listening sessions, we had a similar question about enslaved indigenous peoples. And that too is going to be based on not only what we can find in the records, but also on building relationships with current indigenous communities. We do not want to just sort of go with our handout to ask for something. We are actually in the trust building stage. It's one of the elements, one of the projects that I'm a part of is the Maryland History and Culture Collaborative. And so that's a statewide informal gathering of librarians, archivists, and museums. And we are working to build relationships with indigenous heritage areas and start that kind of work and assistance and trust building before we move forward and look for ways to center the voices of indigenous people as it relates to this project that we think that it will.
Thank you. It really seems like it extends to so many communities in our area, and we still have descendants of so many of those communities in our region. Another question. One of the items listed among the priorities was archaeological work. Could you perhaps elaborate on that aspect of the work and what might be achieved by it?
Again, thank you for that question. I wish Dr. Leone would have been on here, but one of the things that we would like to investigate to see if there is any remnants of evidence within the actual land here. And so Dr. Leone, if I'm, because I don't have the proposal in front of me, but I know he was specifically interested in the area of the golf course. From my very niche understanding, it's important to be in spaces where it hasn't been a lot of turnover and a lot of development, where land may not have been disturbed with a lot of building and things of that nature. And so I know that was one of the areas of interest for Dr. Leone. Still, there's also interest tangentially in the Rossboro Inn, because that is the oldest building on campus as well. And I feel like if I'm remembering some of our conversations, I know Dr. Leone wasn't as hopeful as possibly finding any physical evidence there, but it wasn't completely off the table. But the golf course was definitely an area of interest with respect to the archaeological survey. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Have you found any information about the religious community's influence either on slavery or on the college?
Just in full transparency here, we are still in the early stages of our investigation. So at this point, we can't say yay or nay on that question, because like I said, we are still in the very early stages. One of the things that we've recently done with respect to the research committee is that we have gone through some of the university records with respect to who were the early families tied to the university. So we have our student ledger here for, I can't remember, I think it goes to 1912 or maybe beyond, but definitely our first class up until 1912, maybe 1917, where it lists the students and it lists who the guardians or family members for the student. And so we transcribed the student that schedule so that we can see the names of the folks tied to the early years of the institution. And then by doing that, hoping to see if we can investigate those families and see if they were a part or had ties to the slave economy. Definitely, we've also transcribed our ledger with respect to who were part of giving the bonds, the money to fund the beginning of our institution as well, and to see what ties those folks had with respect to the slave economy. So we have a lot of spreadsheets right now to go through, to be honest. That's where we are with some of the work on the research committee. But it is going to be a lot of nuanced conversations that's going to come out of that. I think Dr. Brewer made a really good point as far as the idea of a smoking gun. We may not find that particular thing in this but it's going to be more of a nuanced conversation, I think, as we start to pull all these pieces together. And then, again, tying that back to more contemporary history and moving that, looking at our story with respect to segregation and desegregation and the role our HBCUs and the fact of why those HBCUs exist. And so that's going to be an important part of our story. So yeah, I made a mental note to look at that, look into that question that you've asked with respect to the impact of religious communities. But thank you for that question. But we will add that to our docket.
And if I can just
add the glamorous stage of the research process.
And if I can just add that we've given ourselves quite an ambitious deadline, at least for the first report of our findings. Again, our kickoff, our inaugural launch will include, in addition to a keynote speaker, will include presentation of what we found so far. And as Lae'l said, these kinds of sessions definitely help because right now we know that that's one of the research questions that will be of interest. So just want to double click on thanking for these questions. Thank you all.
Thanks. Dr. Brewer, did you want to add anything about the religious communities?
Nothing in particular, no. I know what is interesting is that the Quaker connection is intriguing, to say the least. And that's probably an area that, can, reveal quite a bit and outcomes, strange, can come out of that. But that'll be interesting to sort of see. I personally, I was surprised even when I read that part of it. And so there are also many Quakers across the river in Alexandria at the time, and I think there was some connection there as well. I mean, even my question will also be as well, how does Calvin even know a Quaker? But stranger things happen. So I'm sure the results are going to be very, very good. I think in terms of really revealing and building a complex, what is really a complex a story, a fuller a story, when you're including a whole lot more persons and events and people previous times didn't think about, or just, assumed away. And now you're bringing everything to the fore, a much richer story of Maryland's founding.
Right. I know that there's a Friends meeting house in Adelphi. I'm wondering how deep its roots are. Thank you. Another question from Sarah Wilder. Thank you so much for the work and the presentation. I'm curious about timeline or process for faculty interested in developing courses associated with the project. How can we get involved or coordinate with you?
We do have a committee. As Joni kept plugging, like, we want more people. But we do have a scholarship. I think it's cross curriculum. I'm sorry, it's one of our longer titles. Committee where we do need support in that type of curriculum development. Again, thinking about the massive spreadsheets that that we have, we want to begin to start also working with our teaching and learning team in the library to start to look at what a module would look like to support curriculum development. But it's always great to have more faculty involved so that their voice can be added to what that module would look like to support classroom work. So there's not a timeline. Joni, I'm sure would say like today, if you want to join today.
Well, let me just say that we have a commitment to create a course packet, or at least provide some material for a course in the fall. So honestly, if you want to give us a timeline, you might want to just reach out to me and we can work on a timeline together. I feel like maybe I was pushing things, but if you don't ask, it's your own fault for not getting what you want.
I love it. I think Sarah just got volunteered. Friendly Ryan, has any thought been given to linking with local places like Marietta, Montpelier, and most especially Riverdale?
I'll say, Joni, I don't want to feel like I'm always that. I hope I'm not beating you to the buzzer. But like, there's no way we could do this work without connecting to Riversdale. So we are definitely, I will want to give acknowledgement to the head of our special collections, Doug Elrath. He has probably some of the strongest ties due to some of his community work that he's been doing with different cultural heritage institutions. But Joni, I'm sorry, her name is leaving me right now, and that's horrible. Who we've invited.
Either Maya Davis or Jennifer Flood that you're thinking of.
Maya Davis and Jennifer Flood. But Jennifer Flood, who and Maya Davis, who are part of Riversdale, we've invited them to our meetings, and Ms. Flood is specifically is a part of our research committee, and then Maya has come to our general standing committee meetings, right, Joni? If I'm.
And I would just add the Mount Pillier repository is part of the collaborative that I talked to you about. So good ideas. This really helps. I'm happy to say that we touch on those, but we are by no means sort of expert in terms of who to whom we should be reaching out to. I started here in 2019. I do have the privilege of being born and raised in Maryland and part of the Queen family descendant community, which has a lot of interactions with Georgetown University and their reparative work. So I'm familiar with the process, but Prince George's County is an area and community and a network that I want to grow, and I so appreciate feedback.
And just as an additional note, we are hoping with our summer research initiative that the students participating will have a chance to visit Riversdale as part of their work. And Riversdale has some very interesting records with respect to the Calvert family that we're hoping that we'll be able to utilize for our investigation as well. So Riversdale will definitely be, just again, underlining how critical Riversdale will be to our work.
Thanks. Are you anticipating that the outreach events that you outlined will be live events or online, assuming that COVID guidelines don't change? Look into the future and tell me what November 1st, 2022 is going to be like.
Well, I will say that the listening sessions so far have been virtual, and that actually worked in our favor because we have these interactive polls, and we can sort of get the results live through the polling features. However, the November 1st event, we went ahead and booked a location on campus. Yes, fingers crossed all around, because we do hope that will be an in-person event. And the future symposium will, I think maybe we'll keep listening sessions as virtual, but conferences and our annual, what I hope will become an annual Maryland Emancipation Day celebration and report on our findings, will be in-person events.
Yeah, thank you. I hope they are in-person events as well. This question is from the Dean. She thanks you for your fascinating presentation. You talk about trying to understand the impact of the founding context on the unfolding history of the university. I know it's a lot to anticipate, and I'm delighted to see that you'll do a listening session with Black alumni. In light of that, what are your plans for oral history with still living alums, staff, and or faculty?
I'm going to let Lae'l start with this.
Thank you so much, Dean, for this question. Twofold. We've already started an oral histories project with respect to Black alumni, and through the wonderful support of Clear DLF grant and AdHum, we were able to get a postdoc Dr. Francina Turner, I want to make sure I say her name wherever I am, who's been doing amazing work and was recently able to get 42 oral histories just within a year, which there's no way that could happen unless you have a person dedicated. Like, that is all that they do. Because anyone who does this work knows that building relationships with communities who have had complicated or complex histories with institutions, specifically predominantly white institutions, that is a bridge that you really have to build and nurture. And so the fact that we were able to have a person dedicated to that work has been extremely beneficial and important to the success of that project. And with that, we've been able to get across, it's intergenerational, it's across several decades that we now have voices from that project where those oral histories will be ingested into university archives. But also, because we have representation and have voices from the amazing Lakeland Community Heritage Project, who also has an oral history project that they have started that has amazing stories that also include alumni and just in general community members from Lakeland. We're hoping to see some intersections there and to be able to support or have crossover with and cross-pollination with that work with the Lakeland Community Heritage Project as well, because as you know, a lot of those families go back several generations, and there's long memory there. So really looking forward to bringing the synergy between those two particular projects in particular.
And in fact, I'll just pick up on the second part of what Lae'l, my colleague, said, because this work intersects so well with the work we do with special collections and university archives. The oral history component is an element of the community archives work that I'm doing. And with community archives, the community, their voices are centered, their projects are centered. So again, as Lae'l said, we will be supporting not only Lakeland, but we plan to grow, and in collaboration with the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission and our Maryland Milestones Heritage Area, supporting multiple communities, many of whom are African-American communities surrounding in Prince George's County, in either creating or furthering their oral history projects and helping them with the technology, but then also serving as, if there is a desire to find a university home, to either serve as that home or to link them with whatever place they think would be the most suitable for them. And again, thank you for that question, Dean Thornton-Dill.
Another question from the audience. It sounds like you've done an impressive amount of outreach to other universities working on this important topic. I'm curious about some of what you've heard from other campuses in terms of their experience and outcomes. What kinds of memorializations and projects have emerged?
There are definitely physical memorials. I can think of it at least 6 universities that have worked to create physical memorials. UVA, the College of William and Mary. There's also been memorials in the form of using research to rename building and spaces on campus. And I'm thinking about Johns Hopkins University, their Hard Histories at Hopkins program. Their memorialization is taking the form of creating memorial scholarships in the names of I'm just struggling to remember if it were community member descendants. Yes, they work with the descendants to come up with names for scholarships, and that the scholarship avenue is something that we're thinking about quite a bit too.
And we did put in our proposal that we want physical space on campus. We did put that in there. And actually during our conversation with President Pines, he also mentioned interest in, a potential exhibit space dedicated to this history. And so, and an archive dedicated to this history. So, so we kept that in mind as well as we asked that, that we would like an actual physical space to honor and acknowledge this part of our history at our institution. So, and we know that would be a lot of money. And so, that work, again, I think Joni mentioned earlier, will not be done overnight if we are able to get a physical space. And so it will involve a massive capital campaign and so forth. And, hopefully we can get students, some of the stuff that we've talked about, students to help. What would you imagine a physical space would look like, or a design, or what have you, to really try to get a lot of input from our Turk community and our surrounding community in Prince George's County for what the end result for that could potentially look like.
I'd like to sort of weigh in there a bit as somebody who has, I've been participating in Universities Studying Slavery almost since its formation, and the organization itself has grown as you were mentioning those numbers. And it's global now. So it's in Britain, in Europe. I think it's heading towards South America, Canada for sure. And so it's global. And so that sort of variety, also you will see that variety of responses as well. So it's big schools and small schools. It's a whole variety. The USS Consortium has also started to involve historically Black colleges and universities. So you can sort of see the ways in which this itself grows, gives you a sense of the scope. And so it's ambitious. And I think that, what the 1856 project is doing is ambitious and should even perhaps be more ambitious. Because if you just take that matter of the HBCUs, the College Park itself is part of that history because during official segregation, HBCUs themselves are developing in relationship to the exclusivist policies that pertained and obtained at College Park. And University of Maryland College Park has a particular relationship with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore in terms of sports and all those. That's a whole other area again that I think, the project itself would benefit from. It reaching, those connections, Bowie State, reaching those various connections that it has to the HBCUs.
That's fascinating. Thank you. I wanted to just follow up. Joni, you said that both UVA and William and Mary had physical spaces of memorialization. What do those look like? Just ours would be better, but what do theirs look like?
I'm drawing a blank on the College of William and Mary now, but UVA's, I believe it's how do I describe it? Kind of in many ways, it reminds me of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's very sort of low and kind of circular. It's sort of in a garden atmosphere. It has a sort of place for reflection. And I do believe, and this is, I haven't visited, I'm just going from what I've seen on their website. It has the names that they have uncovered through research so far of enslaved people who worked to make their university possible. Oh, and there's someone helping me out by providing that link.
Right. Maybe Matt, you could share that link with everyone. That'd be great. Thank you.
I just dropped the one for William and Mary too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do we have other questions coming through? Well, I can go to one of my questions. Lae'l, you mentioned while you're speaking atonement, and memorialization is one thing, right? But atonement looks different. And you know, when I hear atonement, it sounds different to me from reparation. Those are three important elements: atonement and reparation and memorialization. I was just wondering, you know, what might atonement look like, and is it different for the institution versus the programming versus what individuals can do? If you could say a little more about that, I'd appreciate it.
I think that's a hard answer.
I'm sorry, I mean it in the spirit of open-heartedness, because
no,
I
do. No, I appreciate the question. We appreciate the question, but that's hard because like you even just acknowledged, you just said atonement looks different than what reparations. And I feel like depending on the community that we're speaking to, how they're defining what atonement is going to also vary. So I would, especially at this stage, especially since we're still doing our listening session, I wouldn't feel I wouldn't feel right to give an answer for that, because I wouldn't want that to like hover over.
Right, I don't mean to set any kind of standard, but maybe it's just worth.
But I do appreciate the question. And that is
about.
something that we want to get, that is definitely something we want to get to and get at the heart of, for what does it mean for our institution to atone. And I still feel like it's so early to be able to define what that is and set the boundaries for that. Joni, I don't know if you want to add.
Joni or Dr. Brewer, either one.
One of the benefits, I think, as well of the Universities Studying Slavery Consortium is precisely it's a opportunity, it's a platform, it's an opportunity, it's a venue for having precisely those discussions and sharing, you know, the experiences, you know, of other institutions of higher education and how they've approached those specific concerns, issues, and how, you know, what that experience was, and we learn, you know, from each other that way, and it helps us to basically in that reckoning, in this great reckoning, of course, that is taking place. I mean, this is just one small element of what we know is national and indeed international. I think we all followed recently what happened in Bristol, England, with you know, Edward, the one of the biggest slave traders, you know, in history there, and his statue that was brought down by a group of people and dumped into the harbor. And then those people were, and in Bristol, it had been going on for a while, issues around him. And the folks who were responsible for removing the statue and dumping it were actually sued. They took them to court, and a jury of their peers acquitted them. You know, for doing that, which also kind of tells you something about where things are, at least in Bristol, where the public opinion was, you know, the attitude, the people's, the way the public itself is thinking about these issues are roiling public debate. They're up in front there, and it's not going anywhere. It's going to be around for quite a while. You know, this whole matter of reckoning with that particular past. That's the difficult history part. You know, it's going to be there for a while.
Yes, absolutely. I was thinking that one of the, I went to the listening session that you had for faculty and staff. And I think one of the things that was emerging while you were speaking is that these efforts, they don't take, you know, it's not even a matter of years, it's a matter of decades, and it's a matter of making a long-term commitment to the kinds of scholarship and curriculum development that you're talking about. And it's, you know, I think that is exactly what the arts and humanities are built for, is to ask these difficult questions and make those explorations. Are there any other? Oh, go ahead, Lae'l.
No, and as Dr. Brewer was just saying, that like we're in this moment, where things are bubbling up, and really as we proceed with this work, obviously we cannot ignore the environment that we're in, and this will cause us to test our mettle to make sure that we stand by what we say our convictions are as an institution, and that when we start to get the answers from our communities that we're working with about what atonement looks like, what does reparations potentially look like, how we should be shaping this story, like to make sure we stand by our conviction about what we said we were going to do, and follow through with that, despite whatever the social and political winds are as we continue with this work.
And if I could just follow up on what you had said, Carolyn, about this is not just scholarship for the 3 years of this award, it's decades long. One of the other elements for University Studying Slavery is that it has an annual conference where it shares, reports on its findings, shares best practices. And some of its early members, 2014, are still uncovering very rich and valuable research. And one of, again, the usefulness of going virtual is that we've been able to attend so many annual conferences and see the kind of work they're doing, learning their research strategies. And then again, after almost a decade, they still feel as if there's more to uncover and more work to do.
And that's one of the beautiful things about it. It just keeps unfolding. And, well, I want to thank everyone for attending. And I'm going to just throw in a plug here for the Dean's Lecture Series on Tuesday. Dean Bonnie Thornton-Dill will be in conversation with Nicole Hannah-Jones. So if you are interested in this kind of work, or in the 1619 project, and that's at the Clarice, that is a live event, I understand.
That's May 3rd?
Mm-hmm. Tuesday, May 3rd, in the evening, I think, 6:30, I want to say. If I'm wrong, someone will correct me, I'm sure. But thank you so much, Dr. Brewer, Joni, Floyd, Lae'l, Hughes-Watkins. Really appreciate you being here, and thank you all for coming. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your wonderful
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
For the invite.
Thanks very
Thank you.
much.